Hey, this is V, and the book I'll be talking about today is Terciel and Elinor by Garth. I was pretty excited to see that Garth had written another book in the Abhorsen universe. This is the prequel to the original trilogy and takes place before book 1, which is called Sabriel. It focuses on her parents. So for people who aren't familiar with the Abhorsen trilogy, these stories take place in a world primarily centered around these two countries, which are next to each other and separated by a wall. So you have the Old Kingdom in the north, which is where you have magic and monsters and people can cast spells and things like that. Then you have Ancelstier in the south on the other side of the wall, where they have a certain level of technology like airplanes and stuff like that, and magic actually literally does not function unless you live really close to the border, and there's a strong north wind, which they say brings magic with it out of the Old Kingdom. So this is the prequel to Sabriel, and like I said, focuses on her parents, and the narrative sort of moves between their two plot lines. First, we have Terciel, which is her father, and he is currently the Abhorsen-in-waiting. So the Abhorsen is like a really special post in the Old Kingdom where everyone who holds this position is a special kind of necromancer who fights evil sorcerers, other necromancers, and dead creatures. Their job is to lay the dead to rest and to prevent necromancers from bringing things back that shouldn't really come back into the living world. He's not very confident, I think, in his abilities, because in this book he's really just coming into his responsibilities, and it's also when he first meets Caragor, which is a greater dead creature that becomes Sabriel's main nemesis in book 1 of the original series. On her mother's end, Elinor is a young woman from Ancelstier. She doesn't know anything about the Old Kingdom because her mom forbade everyone in the household from talking about anything related to it. But after a really tragic event at her house, she discovers that there's a lot more to her heritage than she originally believed. She has a blemish on her forehead, which her mother always said was a terrible scar, but she discovers that it's actually what they call a charter mark in the Old Kingdom and is what you need in order to learn magic. And this begins sets her on a journey to learn, I guess, more about herself and more about the Old Kingdom. And this is eventually how they come together. I think one thing that was really interesting about this book was hearing more about charter magic with Elinor, as she prepares herself to go into this really dangerous and mysterious country, because learning about charter magic wasn't really something that was discussed as quite as much in the original series, since those were characters that grew up with it as a part of their lives. But I think that if you haven't read the original series, then this is probably not a good book to start with, because in terms of the Abhorsen's duties, the dead, and what these necromancers actually do and how necromancy works, which is a major element of the Old Kingdom and the stories, this book does not do quite as thorough a job as the later ones. So if you want to try this series, I would recommend starting with Sabriel.